All right, guys, we're bringing back the Reddit React series where I answer your hardest questions on Reddit. So this is analogous to the days of Yahoo Answers. I used to be on there all the time. So this one is in the mixing and mixing mastering subreddit from the user 72467. He asks, or they ask, why do my masters look visually different compared to mainstream masters? They say, I know it's looked down upon to compare visually, but it's on every song they make. So I must be doing something wrong. For my wave files, you can see a much sharper hit when the drums hit. And for a few reference tracks that are comparable to a song I'm mastering, it visually seems as if they drive the song into the limiter more. But when I do it, I usually cause some distortion or it just doesn't sound as good, which I know might mean the mix isn't the best. But sonically, my song sounds comparable, very clean, and even a little louder than the reference track. So I'm confused. Should I start driving my songs into a limiter more? So what they're talking about, and let's describe this in FL Studio. So what they're referring to is, let's pull up a drum break, for example, because drums help you guys understand a little bit about loudness and transients. So what he means by pointy parts of his audio is the transient portion. So let's find a drum break real quick. This is by Tammuz. We're just going to use a random one. We're not worried about the genre here. Okay, so the pointy parts of this audio are called transients. Transients are needed for our ear to detect change and importance in a sound. It basically is a threshold in our brain that hears, basically when you're asleep, if you get a heavy enough transient, you're going to wake up. Okay, put it that way. So if you double click in here, we can go to what's called the editor. So let's right click, edit in audio editor. So look how pointy this audio is. It goes from, 0 dB all the way up. It goes from wherever it is, negative whatever dB to 0 dB almost. Okay, and it's very, very pointy. So limiters, let's describe a limiter first before we start talking about the actual solution here. So what he says is that he wants to drive his sound through a limiter, which can create a sound. It's not that limiters don't create a sound, it's that the sound he's referring to is not only a limiter. Okay, so let's run this drum sound through a limiter. So limiter is going to reduce the volume of a sound very fast. Okay, its whole job is to catch transients. Okay, it wants to catch the pointy parts of your audio so that we don't go above 0. I don't want to bore you guys with the technical term, but the point is the goal of a limiter is to pull down the pointy parts. Now, if I push the sound through a limiter, it's just going to sound more compressed and almost like we're falling into the beat, if I had to describe it. It's pulling out 11 dB of gain right here, which is not a good thing. Okay, so imagine watching TV and every millisecond you have to turn up the volume, turn down the volume, turn up the volume, it's too much. Okay, so what we can do is actually get rid of those transient peaks using different plugins. There are many plugins to use. There's standard clip, which is affordable. And basically what we can do is lower what's called the threshold for our clipping mechanism here. I haven't used this in a while, so I got to get used to the user interface here. So this little red area here, so let me kind of exaggerate this. This red area is showing the attenuation or the volume that I'm removing from the actual sample. Okay, so it's removing that much. And that's important because, again, what we're doing here is similar to a limiter, but it's not the same. Okay, I don't want to get into the algorithms and the styles of what compressors do versus clipping. Clipping is basically adding a saturation to your sound. It's changing the wave. I believe they call it a wave transfer. I don't know the exact technical term for it. But what we're doing is changing the waveform. Okay, so basically what we can do with a clipper is take off the transients and maintain the image of the sound and make it sound more full. Whereas we don't have to push it through a limiter and reduce the volume and make it sound smaller. So I'm going to exaggerate this because that's the only way to teach is to exaggerate stuff. Let's do a before and after. So here's a before. And we're hitting at what? Negative 13 dB, negative 14 dB. Now let's turn the clipper on. I'm hitting at the same negative 14 or negative 13, but it sounds way louder. Okay, so here's before. Here's after. So how is it that we are sounding louder at the same dB without using a limiter? It's because we're chopping off the tops and we're changing the waveform. Again, without boring y'all to tears, because I will, is we're changing the round stuff into more square stuff. That's basically what a clipper is doing. Basically, we're changing the round stuff into square stuff. And when you change a sine wave into a square wave, you get more harmonics. It fills out the sound frequency. You're actually adding frequencies to your track, and it makes the sound feel nice and full, depending on the genre. So we can pull this drive input back a little bit to get rid of some of that tone that we've added, the harmonic content, I should say. And you could drive the saturator even harder. And again, we're still at -14 dB. So it's not the dB of a sound that makes it loud, I'll say. This is a night and day difference. Okay, so that's how they get that boom bap smack, is that they're pushing their drums through a clipper first, then they run it through a limiter. So now the limiter does not have to reduce the volume as much. The limiter is more so like, okay, let's turn it up. And it's more even too, so the limiter won't reduce at 11 dB and then 6 dB and then 3 dB and then 11. It's more even across. And I'll even show you guys some other techniques too. So again, let's do it before and after. We barely pushed the limiter. We pushed it 2 dB, which is still a lot. So here's before. Same nominal level here, -14. Well, now we've added a limiter so that we're up a little bit of dB. Now we're at -12 and we sound way, way louder than we did at -14. Now, if I simply just boost this up 2 dB, that does not give me the same energy. It actually gives me a little bit less. So that's how people are getting these full sounds. It's because they're taking these pointy parts of their audio, they're chopping off the tops of the points, they're squaring off the shape. If I were to record this, even without the limiter, let's record it back into Edison just to show you guys visually what this looks like. All right, we're gonna record on play. And then you guys will visually see where the pointy parts turn into more of a squared, flat shape. And again, we're only addressing those pointy parts of the audio because once they go beyond that threshold of the clipper transforms the waveform into that square type shape. So we can almost visually see from afar. A little bit tricky with drums, but I wanted to start with the pointiest things in a mix. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay, because you can see right here with this more triangular snare up top, it's just like a straight Christmas tree. It goes point, all the way down in decay. Curvature. But that same snare, once we ran it through a clipper, I lost my spot here. That same snare, once you ran it through the clipper, is shaved off. We shaved off all the pointiness of the snare and we made it more flat across, which allows us to push this inner volume, this part down here that's not as loud. Now we can push this part up and everything kind of becomes the same condensed sound. I'll exaggerate this a lot. I won't let you guys listen to it because it'll just sound like chaos. Let's boost this a crazy amount and let's record this. I guess Edison, let me see if Edison can even hear as long as we don't have output. Let me do this. We're going to do an experiment here. Let's see how pointy we can get it. I mean, how flat. So I'm really pushing the signal now. And this might be your style for Kanye drums. Okay. So you guys can't hear it. I don't want to blow your ears out right now. Okay. I just want to visually show you what we're doing to those pointy parts of the audio. So again, this is not just a limiter. Limiter would not do the same thing. And just to prove that, let's turn off the clipper and turn the limiter back on. Whoa. Okay. I almost blew you guys' speakers. Glad I caught that. All right. Now here is the, man, so much going on. Oh, you know what? I recorded that too. So that's not a fair thing. Let me re-record this section. I'm not going to rerun the video. Hold on. All right. So I took the time to run stuff through the limiter and the clipper just to show you guys a visual difference of what's happening. So to make it very, very, very clear, the bottom here is heavy limiting, and it looks like the original. So if you zoom in, you see it's very pointy. This is the original up top, very, very pointy. Everything looks like a Christmas tree. With the limiting, it just made stuff more pointy. So basically what it's doing is just making stuff not hit zero, but it retains the image for the most part of the audio. So that's what we're doing. We're not reshaping the audio for the most part. I know I'm generalizing here, but limiting is not about reshaping the audio unless you have very specific settings with a fast limiter, or excuse me, a fast release, pardon me, and a fast attack to saturate the sound, and reshape it. So we're getting pretty much the same sound, just boosted to simplify it. Whereas clipping is not giving you the same sound. We're chopping off the tops of the audio and we're changing the actual harmonics of a sound. So now the snare is more full because quite literally the difference between a sine wave and a square wave is the difference in the frequency content or the harmonics. So a square wave has many more frequencies than a sine wave. A sine wave is only one frequency, the fundamental frequency, whereas a square wave is multiple harmonics. Okay, so that's what we're doing here from the original up top, this Christmas tree type shape, and then we're moving into clipping, which is flattening these pointy parts out. And that's how we can create more room to then turn everything back up. And that's how it became so loud. So let's just audibly hear the differences in each one of these. Now this one is hard clipping, where basically I jam the input volume all the way in and we set our threshold for the clipper. And basically it's shaving off so much of the audio because it passed that threshold that now we get more of this flattened, less dynamic performance. And the tricky part about drums in general is you want to use the drums as a dynamic performance to keep people's ear latched to the groove of the track. If you take away too much dynamic, the listener can actually not feel like there's movement, and that's not fun. You know, it's not really moving. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. I forgot to turn off the processing here. Okay, so here's the original. Very just pointy, straightforward. Okay, now let's use the light clipping version. You can really hear it in the kick. It's like, vroom. There's more density to that track because of that clipping. Again, we're changing sine waves and transforming them into more of a square wave. Okay, here's the hard clipping, where it's like obvious saturation here and distortion. Now notice I can turn this down and it still sounds louder than this stuff that looks way bigger. It's because we're adding frequency content to the track. That's why it sounds so loud. There's more frequencies happening. And that's how, if you guys remember in the mixer, I said, how are we still at -14, but it sounds louder? It's because as I turn this stuff down, when you compare again a sine wave to a square wave, it's just going to be louder based on the harmonics, the frequencies that are in a sound. And that's how you can create more room to then turn your track even louder. Okay, so for loud mixes, it's all about handling transient or pointy information in your track. Now that was the hard clipping mode. Lastly, let's talk about the limiter. Here's the limiter, the heavy limiting. The only way to really describe the limiter is to listen to how it pulls your ear in to like lock into the groove. It just pulls you in. Now for that drum, it sounded really good to have heavy limiting. Here's the original. It just doesn't pull you in. It's like you hear the drums, but you're not pulled in by the drums. Whereas the limiter version, you really feel that movement. So that's what a limiter or a compressor is all about, is that movement. Okay, so there are uses for each one. There's no right or wrong one, but if you're going for loudness, which is what the Redditor said, it's all about using the clipper to chop off the pointy parts first, and then you could turn stuff up, because listen to how loud this could get. I mean, I'm turning this up. If I turned it up all the way to match the same dB that these other clips were on, it would just blow our speakers. So let me turn this down. Even with the fader turned almost all the way down, it sounds louder than the original. Like here's the original, peaking at what, negative, whatever it was, like 14, let's say. Here's with hard clipping. We're at negative 22 and it's negative 25 and it still sounds louder than negative 14. So that's what clipping is all about. And that's how people get these dense tracks that look like this waveform right here. It's because they're running their stuff through clippers, which allows them to turn everything else of the sound up. And now you hear everything in the sound more aggressively. And again, it's because we're taking these pointy parts, as you can see visually here. This part of the kick or snare, or the kick, is more rounded. And then when we ran the sound through the clipper, it just flattened and squared off everything. So that's what it's doing, is squaring off the sound. Without boring you guys just about the technicals, that is how it works. And that is how you get your tracks to sound louder as a master. All right. So thank you guys for watching. This game from busyworksbeats.com. Peace out, guys. If you want to learn more, actually go to busyworksbeats.com/premium. I'll teach you guys how to mix in the mixing fundamentals course, and we cover the mastering part too. So peace out, guys.